What if I told you the most heartbreaking song in the history of soft rock was written by two men who never saw a cent from it? Not because it failed, because it didn't. Without You went to number 1. Twice. Once for Harry Nilsson in 1972. Once for Mariah Carey in 1994. It has been recorded by over 180 artists. Paul McCartney called it the killer song of all time. The Rolling Stone 500 Greatest Songs list includes it. The Ivor Novello Award went to its writers. Two men from a Welsh band most of your neighbors have never heard of. Two men who looked at that song and decided it wasn't good enough to release as a single. Two men whose manager took everything they earned and hid it inside a maze of shell companies while they struggled to pay their grocery bills. One of them left a note. It did not say he was sorry. It said a name. And it said that name would go down with him. If you haven't done so, like and subscribe. Here is how Badfinger wrote the most covered ballad of the 20th century and got buried alive for it. To understand what Stan Polley took from Badfinger, you first have to understand what Badfinger actually was. They were not a bar band. They were not a novelty act riding someone else's coattails. They were the real thing. And in the early 1970s, the music world knew it. It started in Swansea, Wales in the early 1960s. A teenager named Pete Ham formed a band called the Ivies with drummer Mike Gibbons. They were kids playing covers in clubs, dreaming about London. Tom Evans came in on bass. They ground it out for years in the way bands do. Vans, bad food, small rooms, big ambitions. Then something extraordinary happened. In 1968, Mal Evans, the Beatles' personal assistant, the quiet giant who carried their equipment and kept the machine running, heard the Ivies and brought them to Apple Records. All 4 Beatles listened. All 4 said yes. The Ivies became the first band ever signed to Apple, not the second, the first. Think about what that meant. Apple Records in 1968 was the most exciting label on the planet. It had the Beatles on it. It had credibility no amount of money could manufacture. And the Ivies, 4 kids from Wales, were the first act those 4 men decided were worth signing. By 1969, they had a new name, Badfinger, lifted from the working title of a Beatles song. And Paul McCartney handed them their first single. He wrote Come and Get It specifically for them, produced it himself, and told them not to change a note. It went top 10 worldwide. Just like that, Badfinger had arrived. What followed was a run that most bands would trade everything for. No matter what in 1970. Top 10 worldwide again. Day After Day in 1971. Produced by George Harrison, who also brought them in to play on his landmark triple album, All Things Must Pass. They stood on the stage at the concert for Bangladesh in August of 1971, playing to tens of thousands of people alongside Harrison, Ringo Starr, Eric Clapton, and Bob Dylan. Think about the company they were keeping. Think about where they stood in the world of music in that moment. Baby Blue followed in 1972, another hit. Decades later, a television show called Breaking Bad would use it in its finale and introduce it to an entirely new generation. The song never needed help staying alive. 4 consecutive worldwide hits, 14 million records sold, collaborators who were the most famous musicians on earth. You probably heard Day After Day on the radio, driving somewhere you can still picture. That warm descending guitar line, that voice. That was Pete Ham. He was 24 years old and buried on the first side of their 1970 album, No Dice. Unmarked, unannounced, not released as a single in North America or Europe, was a song Ham and Evans had stitched together from 2 unfinished pieces. Ham had a verse he liked, but no chorus. Evans had a chorus he couldn't build a song around. They fit them together like 2 halves of a key. Neither man thought it amounted to much. They slotted it near the end of side 1 and moved on. The song was Without You. Harry Nilsson heard it at a party in Laurel Canyon in 1971. He spent 2 weeks convinced it was a Beatles song, going through album after album trying to find it before someone told him the truth. He went into the studio and recorded what would become one of the defining ballads of the decade. It hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It won the Ivor Novello Award for Best Song musically and lyrically. The men who wrote it received the award in London. They were flying. They had no idea the ground was already gone. But here is the turn. In November of 1970, while Badfinger was charting and touring and standing on stages with George Harrison, a man named Stan Polley was quietly building a cage around them. Polley was a New York businessman. He came recommended. He had managed Lou Christie and Al Cooper. He wore the right suits and said the right things and projected the kind of authority that young musicians from Wales, with no American representation and no legal sophistication, found deeply reassuring. Mike Gibbons, the drummer, said his first impression was that Polley was a powerful guy. Joey Molland thought he seemed like a father figure. There was just one problem. In 1971, Stan Polley was named during United States Senate investigation hearings as an intermediary between unnamed organized crime figures and a New York Supreme Court judge. This was public. This was in the newspapers. Most of Polley's other American clients read it and walked away immediately. Badfinger stayed. They were British, they were busy, they trusted the father figure. The contracts Polley had them sign were not standard management agreements. They were instruments of total financial control. Every income stream, touring revenue, recording advances, publishing income, songwriter performance royalties, was directed into holding companies that Polley controlled. The band received salaries. Polley decided what those salaries were. A financial statement prepared by Polley's own accountants covers the period from December of 1970 to October of 1971. It shows exactly what was happening. In that period, Pete Ham received $5,959. Tom Evans received $6,211. Mike Gibbons received $6,861. Joey Molland received $8,339. Stan Polley received $75,744 in management commissions alone. Let that number sit. The four men generating every dollar of that income collectively took home less than $28,000 combined. Their manager pocketed nearly $76,000. This was not a standard commission. Standard commissions ran between 5 and 10%. Polley was taking 30% and calling it management. And that was only what the statement showed. In 1972, Polley negotiated a new record deal with Warner Brothers Records. The contract required advances to be placed into an escrow account that both Warner's publishing division and the band could access. It was a standard protection, a basic safeguard. Polley agreed to it. He never disclosed the account's location to anyone. Warner Brothers asked, then demanded, then sued. In February of 1974, Warner's publishing arm filed a lawsuit against Polley and Badfinger Enterprises for fraudulently obtaining and misusing advance payments exceeding $385,000. The label stopped promoting Wish You Were Here after 7 weeks. Distribution was pulled worldwide. The completed album, Head First, finished, paid for, ready, was rejected. The label refused to even accept the tapes. Here is what nobody tells you about what that meant on the ground. Badfinger did not know where their money was because there was no money. Their March 1975 salary checks did not clear. The April checks never arrived at all. Pete Ham had just bought a house in Woking, Surrey for £30,000. His girlfriend Anne was 8 months pregnant. He tried to reach Polley by phone repeatedly in the early months of 1975. Polley never picked up, never called back, never answered. The band tried to find new management. They contacted booking agents across London. Every door closed. Their contracts with Polley were so restrictive and the legal actions so tangled that no reputable manager would touch them. They were famous. They were broke. And they were legally trapped inside an arrangement with a man who had vanished with everything they had earned. On the night of April 23, 1975, Pete Ham received a phone call from the United States. The call told him that all of his money was gone. That night, Pete Ham called Tom Evans. They went to the White Hart pub in Surrey. Ham drank 10 whiskeys. Evans drove him home at 3 o'clock in the morning of April 24th, 1975. They said goodnight. Evans pulled away. Ham went into his garage studio in Woking and hanged himself. He was 27 years old, 3 days shy of his 28th birthday. His girlfriend Anne was 8 months pregnant with his daughter. Patera Ham was born 1 month after her father died. She never met him. She grew up in Glasgow knowing her father only through the songs he left behind, songs that other people were getting rich from, while his estate fought for decades to see a fraction of what he was owed. Ham left a note. It was addressed to Anne and to her son Blair. It said he loved them. It said he could not go on. And then, at the bottom, it said this: Stan Polley is a soulless bastard. I will take him with me. He did not take him. That is the cruelest part. Stan Polley outlived Pete Ham by 34 years. He died in Rancho Mirage, California in 2009 at 87 years old, in the sun, in comfort, having never spent a single day in prison for anything he did to Badfinger. You probably owned no dice. You probably heard Without You 100 times before you ever knew Pete Ham's name. You heard it on the radio. You heard Nilsson's version shaking the speakers in someone's living room. You heard it at weddings. You heard it in films. It was everywhere. It was inescapable. And every time it played, royalties flowed somewhere. They just did not flow to the man who wrote it. But here is the kicker. In 1974, while Warner Brothers was suing Polley and distribution of Wish You Were Here was being pulled worldwide, Mariah Carey had not yet covered Without You. That came 20 years later.
I should let you know what you should know.
In 1994, her version hit number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became one of the biggest selling singles of that year. Pete Ham's estate reportedly received royalties exceeding $500,000 from that recording alone. Pete Ham had been dead for 19 years by the time that check arrived. He never knew the song would do that. He never knew McCartney would call it the killer song of all time. He never knew it would appear on the Rolling Stone list of the 500 greatest songs ever recorded. He slotted it near the end of side 1 of No Dice because he didn't think it was strong enough for anything else. He and Evans both said at the time they had no idea the song amounted to much. What he knew, in April of 1975, was that his checks had stopped clearing and his phone calls were not being returned, and his girlfriend was about to have his baby, and the house he had just bought felt like a trap he could not get out of. That is what Stan Polley actually stole, not just the money, the future. The moment when Pete Ham might have sat in a room somewhere and heard Paul McCartney say those words about his song and understood what he had made. That moment was taken from him before it could exist. The band dissolved after Ham's death. Warner Brothers terminated its contract. Apple deleted Badfinger's entire back catalog. The surviving members were left not only grieving, but financially destroyed, entangled in lawsuits they had no money to fight, carrying Polley's legal wreckage on their backs. Tom Evans never recovered, not really. He and Joey Molland eventually regrouped and recorded 2 more albums under the Badfinger name in the late 1970s and early 1980s. But the partnership fractured. By the early 80s, they were running rival touring bands, both using the Badfinger name, fighting each other in court over the right to it. The royalties from Without You, the song Evans had co-written, the song his own chorus had built, were still tangled in legal disputes years after Nilsson's version had made other people rich. On the evening of November 18, 1983, Evans and Molland had an acrimonious telephone argument about those royalties, the specific terms, who was owed what, how the accounting had been handled, the argument that 2 men who had once been bandmates and friends were reduced to having 8 years after their leader had died in a garage because of the same unresolved mess. The next morning, November 19, 1983, Tom Evans hanged himself in the garden outside his home in Richmond, England. He was 36 years old, 8 years apart, 2 men, the same unresolved wound. Stan Polley pleaded no contest to charges of misappropriating funds and money laundering in Riverside County, California in 1991. He received 5 years of probation. He was ordered to pay restitution. He never paid it, not a dollar. He walked out of that courtroom and back into his life, and the order meant nothing because no one made it mean anything. In 2000, Anne, Pete Ham's girlfriend, and Tom Evans's widow went to court together to pursue unpaid royalties, still fighting, still waiting. 25 years after the checks stopped clearing, the people closest to these men were still in courtrooms trying to recover what had been taken. And here is what the music business did with all of this. It called Badfinger a tragedy. It made a documentary, it nodded solemnly, and then it kept streaming without you, and kept collecting its percentages and kept moving on to the next thing. The song Pete Ham thought was too ordinary to release as a single has now been recorded by over 180 artists. It is one of the most performed songs of the 20th century. Every performance generates royalties. The machinery keeps running. The men who built the machine are gone. Here is what you should carry out of this story. Pete Ham and Tom Evans did not fail. They were not brought down by drugs or ego or creative exhaustion or any of the comfortable explanations the music business usually reaches for. They were brought down by a man with a briefcase and a telephone and a set of contracts written specifically to make sure they could never find their own money. They were brought down by an industry that saw it happening and looked the other way. They were brought down by a legal system that waited until 1991 to act, handed out probation, and then watched the restitution order evaporate into nothing. Badfinger wrote the killer song of all time. Paul McCartney said so. The song is still out there right now, playing somewhere, in some film, in some restaurant, in some late-night moment when someone needs to feel something and reaches for it without knowing why. Now you know who put it there. Two men from Wales who stitched two unfinished songs together and didn't think they'd made anything special. Two men who stood on the stage at the concert for Bangladesh and played alongside the most famous musicians on earth and came home to checks that wouldn't clear. Two men who wrote a note and left a garden and never got to hear what the world eventually said about what they'd made. The next time Without You comes on, and it will come on, it always comes on. Don't just feel it, know it. Know whose hands built that chorus. Know what it cost them. Know that the song outlived the men, and the men deserve better, and the industry that used them never once looked back. If this story hit you the way it should, and it should, do something about it. Hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't yet. And to my subscribers, you already know. You rock. You've always known what this music meant. Now you know what it cost.